Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create a monster birthday card using the Monster Love pop-up die set from Spellbinders. This is this die of the month, or the large die of the month for December 2024. I'm also going to use the Confetti Wishes clear stamp. This was the clear stamp of the month from November 2024. But I've used the Monster Love pop-up in a couple of videos already, but I just thought it would be absolutely adorable as a monster birthday card. And I'm doing a slimline one here, but you could use less monsters and just do a regular A2 or A7 size. So I do have a bunch of my little monsters already made ready to go, but I'm going to assemble one here. I'm using both of the monsters from this die set, but I'm only assembling one on screen. The other one I have assembled in a previous video, so you can always watch it there. They're very easy to assemble. Now for this style of monster, I have used some velvet adhesive cardstock. I've used it in some brighter colors. This one doesn't look bright on screen, but it's a nice royal blue in real life. And I put that adhesive cardstock onto just some white paper scraps before die cutting it. So my finished card size is 8.5 by 3.5 inches. I have a piece for the front of my card here, the mat for the front of my card, that's cut to 3.25 inches by 8.25 inches. So there's going to be a little bit of a layer around it. I'm going to do some ink blending behind these little monsters. Now I went and I did a bunch of monsters at the same time. I wasn't sure how many I was going to use. I end up using 5 altogether. You could use less. You could make a bigger card and use more if you wanted, or put some of the monsters on the inside. I wanted to have a large selection of different colored ones, so then I could use the ones that I had and just layer them or arrange them on the front of my card and then decide which colors to go for. So for the front of the card, I'm going to use the Happy Birthday stamp from the Confetti Wishes stamp set. I'm just stamping it right onto the white piece that my monsters are going to go on, and I'm embossing it with some gold embossing powder. I did use some embossing powder tool on my cardstock ahead of time just to make sure that powder was only going to stick to where I have my embossing ink. And I also used the lines or the grid on the front of my Misti stamping tool just to make sure that that stamp was nice and lined up and nice and straight. I'm going to stamp it a couple times just to make sure I have a really good impression from that stamp before adding the gold embossing powder to it. I also chose one of the other sentiments from that same Confetti Wishes stamp set to stamp on the inside of the card, and I'm going to emboss that one as well. I'm just using gold embossing here. It would work with whatever color embossing you want, and because of the colored monsters, you could really choose any color. So I have it poured onto my VersaMark ink. I took all the excess off, and now I'm using my embossing tool to melt that powder right on there. Now I chose to do the embossing because I like the raised finished look it gives. You could just use a colored ink pad and just stamp it flat if you wanted to as well. But because we're going to have some dimension from those monsters, I kind of thought it would be really nice to be able to see that through the ink blending, as well as have that little bit of dimension from that embossing. And I wanted the inside of the card to match the outside, so this is going to be embossed as well. So I'm taking my clear stamp, I'm going to position it in place. Now I have a waffle flower grip mat in my Misti stamping tool to hold that cardstock in place, but it really needs to be washed, so I'm still using the magnets. It's one of those things, when you use your embossing powder tool, it sticks on the exposed part of the mat, and after a while it doesn't really want to stick. Once you wash it, it brings that stick back, and I just wash it with some warm water, a little bit of dish soap, and it comes right back. So once I have that stamped in place, and once again, I did stamp it a couple times just to make sure to have that clear impression, I'm going to pour that embossing powder over there, and I'm going to heat set that as well. So this stamp set has a bunch of different sentiments to it. You can pick whichever one you wanted. I just thought one of the sentiments on the inside would look nice and coordinate well with the sentiment on the outside. And these are Stampin' Dies of the month. This is the stamp for November. The Monster Love Pop is the stamp or the die of the month, large die of the month for December. But once the next month is, after the 10th of the next month, it's usually available on the website as long as they have extras available. And so you don't necessarily have to have a Spellbinders Club membership to get it. You just get it a lot faster that way. For my background, I'm using some distress ink in Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet, and Tumbled Glass. I wanted a nice ink blend between the different colors. So I'm going to do the Picked Raspberry on the left side, going in about a third of the card. The Wilted Violet is going to be in the center, and then the Tumbled Glass is going to be on the right side. And you can see that I'm heavier towards the top than I am towards the bottom. I'm going to put some Hickory Smoke smaller ink blended areas towards the bottom so that those monsters have a little bit of a shadow below them, just to kind of ground them on that card. And I went back in with that large ink blending brush and just did a little bit more at the bottom of that Picked Raspberry. It was a little bit too light compared to the other ones. Now, the one thing I did when I was arranging my monsters was make sure that I didn't have the exact same color behind them. I wanted to make sure they were going to stand out behind or in front of that background. So I'm going to pick or put my monsters on there just so that I know exactly where to do that little bit of gray to go under them to give them a little bit of a shadow. I'm putting the velvety ones towards the front and the other guys towards the back. You can tell that the velvety ones are a little bit more of my favorite. I love the shape of them. I think they're just so quirky and cute. I also, off screen, before starting to videotape, all of my monsters here, I put glossy accents on the eyes so they have some nice dimension to them as well as gloss. Another option here would be to use some googly eyes. I know I have some somewhere in my craft room. I couldn't find where they were to try them out and see if I'd like that for this card. So I didn't end up doing it. I didn't want to go buy more because I knew I already had some. I just had no idea where I had the logical place that I had put them. So the eyes, you'll see when they tilt in the light, they have a little bit of shine to them. To add a little bit of a border around my ink blended piece here, I have the Lisa Horton gold ink pad. This is part of that limited edition set, and I've used it many times in many videos, and I'm just rubbing the edge of my cardstock along that pad just to get a little bit of that gold ink around the edges. Another option here would be to use a gold pen around the edges or just gold cardstock as a mat behind it. Because I have ink blending here and because it's kind of a monster theme, I didn't feel like I needed to have a perfect mat around here. So I thought the ink from the ink pad would work perfectly, and I really love how it frames it in. Now that we have all of those elements ready to go, we're ready to assemble it and add it to the card. So I have some Barely Art glue and a fine line bottle. Just putting this on the back, and this is the same glue that I used to glue all of my monsters together. I use this glue for pretty much everything. I love the fact that there's a fine line bottle for it, so I can get it for even the tiniest of die cuts or larger pieces here. I like to put an acrylic block on my pieces to hold everything nice and flat while they're drying. For the monsters in between the fuzzy ones, I'm going to glue them flat on the card. And the other ones, I want them to have a little bit of an interactive element to them. So I'm going to use some action wobblers so that they pop off and they spring off of the base of the card so that they have just a little bit of action and interaction with them, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Because this card to me is more of a child card because of the colors and because of the monsters, I thought it would be fun to have just kind of a pop-up interactive element to them. Now my action wobblers here are just slightly too big for those monsters, so I'm just using some scissors to trim them down to get them a better size for them. There's only a tiny little bit that shows behind or shows from the edges, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to show. So I take them and I just use my Spellbinders shears here and I just trim them a little bit just to cut off the piece that would be exposed and make sure that they aren't seen in the front of the card. Now the cool thing about these action wobblers is they press flat, so you can fit them into a regular envelope. And then when you pull them out, they kind of spring up as well as they jiggle a little bit. So it's just a fun interactive element. And this is why I think googly eyes would also work well for them, because I think with that spring up and wobble action, you'd have the googly eyes moving as well. And I think that would be fun. So once I have those action wobblers trimmed down, and they were really easy to do, I did have to, because the plastic on the back of them was a little bit thick, I trimmed them down, and then I trimmed one of the sides didn't trim quite as evenly, so I trimmed that one back down again. And it really doesn't matter how they look, because because we're trimming them down, you're not going to see any of those pieces on there. So I'm not too worried about it being perfect. I'm just worried about them being hidden behind those little monsters. So I take that adhesive backing, put them behind each one of those monsters, and once I have those on the back there, we can just put them right onto the card. So that they have adhesive on both sides of them, so the side that will fit on whatever die cut you use that you want to pop up, and then the other side to go onto the base of the card. So I'm going to position them so that they're sitting right over top of the little shadow I made, and you can see how they do flatten out perfectly. So they're going to fit nice and flat into a card. It's not going to require any more dimension. Now you can see that I have the hands from the monsters on either side. I haven't glued down the left one yet. They go off the card a tiny little bit. You could squish the monsters in just a little bit more so that that doesn't happen, but I thought it worked well for this. The last step, I'm just doing a little bit of a gold gel pen on the horns. You could have also, or I could have also, used that gold ink pad and just rub those horns in that ink pad. I didn't actually think of it at the time, so this was the solution afterwards. So here is how that card looks when it's standing up. It stands up really nicely with those monsters popped forward, and then when you press them down, they'll fit right into an envelope. But if you happen to wiggle them or touch them, they do wobble. So I think this is a perfect card for kids, for someone fun, colorful. I absolutely think it's adorable, and it's another way for you to use that Monster Love pop die set. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.